Welcome to King County Connects, where we connect you with the important regional issues of King County. I'm Enrique Cerna. Without new revenue, bus service in the county will have to be cut by 17% next year. So what is that going to mean for bus riders, and how can the county's new strategic plan help make transit more efficient? Joining us now is Councilmember Larry Phillips and Metro Transit General Manager Kevin Desmond. Gentlemen, welcome. Good to have you here. Well, let's first talk about this strategic plan. How did this come about, and how will it help with efficiencies, particularly if you're facing revenue issues? Councilman, start with that.
Certainly. Well, we have been facing a fiscal crisis at Metro for several years now, and we took some very concerted effort and action to head off 17% cuts in the past. We knew we had to redo Metro service to make sure people could get to and from work and service our local economy in a very difficult time for all of us. So we took the effort to step forward and develop a plan that would be data-driven, not driven by politics, to decide how we would reform Metro, make it more efficient, more productive, and keep people getting to and from work on a regular basis. And as well go to Olympia and say, we've reformed our system. We have a much better system today than we've had before, but we do need new revenue. They were able to then give us 2 years of reprieve, which we implemented, and the system is running now much better. We have more riders than ever as a consequence of this plan, but it sets us up for the future that if we have to take those 17% cuts, if we don't get the revenue relief we need from the legislature, then we'll be able to take a very proactive and planned way in which to make those cuts and still get as many people to work on time as possible.
How does this plan help, I guess, as you face the possibility of budget cuts?
Well, I think as Councilmember Phillips points out, first, it set out a different direction for us. It focused us on outcomes. And the key new element of the strategic plan were these service guidelines. And the service guidelines allow for a more transparent, objective, data-driven approach to a productive system that's not governed by different political winds and so on and so forth, because we want to get better value for the transit dollar.
And when we talk about data and we talk about these types of things, are we really talking about ridership and how people may use certain routes and may not use others?
So what we combine is three primary factors in judging the service, whether we're adding or having to subtract, which we hope we don't have to do. Productivity, first and foremost. Productivity is measured by passengers per hour or passengers per mile, but also social equity, making sure that we're getting services to people that need it, transit dependent, low income, senior citizens, people of color. And thirdly, what we call geographic value, making sure that the whole county has its points connected, its various different job centers, its employment centers, because it is a county-wide system. It's really a regional system in many different ways. So when we say data-driven, we want to have facts. We want to have numbers associated with where the service can best be used for the public tax dollar.
What are we looking now as far as if you were having to make a 17% cut? What kind of impact would it have, not only on the service, but I think even on the county, the economy? You know, people depend on bus service here.
You only need to look at Snohomish County and Pierce County, our neighbors. They have gone through tremendous cutbacks in their transit service. No weekend service, no evening service. They've shrunk their service district in terms of who can actually avail themselves of transit, and very crowded buses during the day. And those cuts will continue in those counties as they, again, have to deal with the fiscal crisis and no revenue to keep service going. So that is potentially our future. Again, we'll have a plan that will still keep the most productive routes running, but there will be tremendous impacts on individuals.
From an economic standpoint, I mean, we already have a region where we're having tolls on 520. Talk about tolls on possibly on I-90. We have a lot of people in cars here, and the buses are already crowded as it is. But from an economic standpoint to this area, what do you see the impact?
Well, I think that the fact that there's always a broad coalition of support for public transportation in general, capacity management, how do you manage the roads? How do we keep moving as many people as possible? If we're not moving as many people and goods as possible on the state highways, the state arterials, our local roads, the economy is going to slow down. And a 17% reduction in transit service, it's the equivalent of all of our weekend service. It's the equivalent of all of the extra service we add at commute time for people going to work. Downtown Seattle, 43% of the people who come into downtown Seattle to work take public transportation. Only a third actually drive alone in a car. If public transportation starts to decline at a period of near record ridership, while jobs are growing, while the economies are growing, the region's going to slow down, and it's going to make it a less attractive place to locate business or to stay in business here.
As you've been facing this you got a bit of a reprieve here over the last couple of years, but tell me about developing this plan, the strategic plan, in order to not only help with the efficiency of the way the bus service is now and the way Metro operates, but also how you go about planning for then this possibility of cutbacks. I mean, how has this aided you in doing all that?
Well, we knew we had a very serious problem, and just to finish up on the last point, the flip side of the impact on the pocketbook is also what it means to the regional economy in terms of getting people to and from work. And we knew that if those 17% cuts went into place, it would have a dramatic impact on the ability of people who own businesses being able to get people to and from work in a timely basis, which is why business, and the Chamber in particular, was so supportive of our efforts. But looking forward, we knew that we had to have a regional conversation about changing and reforming Metro, and we reached out to our suburban cities, to a broad array of stakeholders, and said we just simply can't operate Metro the way we have in the past. We have to change. It has to be much more efficient and productivity driven. And after about a year and a half's worth of work, they all came together, unanimous recommendations to move this strategic plan forward, knowing that if those cuts came, we use these guidelines to provide for service cuts. So it was well thought out. It had a lot of citizen input, but it's also set us up, if we have to make those cuts, to do so, as we've said, in a data-driven way.
The strategic plan for you, as the guy that runs the operation, what has it meant? Has it been difficult to reach the point of what you need to do? How has it worked?
Well, I guess two ways to answer that question. First, the consensus that was reached by the Regional Transit Task Force and then the County Council was really historic. It really repaired a suburban versus city dynamic contention that had been in place for a decade or so. That was really making it difficult, whether it was the county executive, the county council, the regional transit committee, and all of it fell to us to try to sort that dynamic out. So repairing that and creating that new consensus about a smart way forward has been liberating, frankly, for us as staff. The challenge then is implementing the guidelines. So on September 29th last year, we had our first really big use of the guidelines. It was something the council asked us to do to become a more productive system. And I think what listeners, what your viewers need to understand is on September 29th, we made a lot of changes. Using the guidelines, we removed some underproductive service, and we put it where it could be used better, where service was unreliable, where it's overcrowded, or some key connections. But we were robbing Peter to pay Paul, frankly. We were taking service away from people that used it, people that depended on that service. While it wasn't used as well as the other top 75% of the system, we had to look at the lower 25%, as our guidelines suggest. How can we bring that better tax value to the taxpayer? But we are taking service away from people who use it. So as much as we can become more productive and efficient, there are human beings using those services. Councilmember Phillips knows that well from his own district. We had to take services away, and it's regrettable. We would prefer to be growing. We would prefer to be growing and becoming more efficient as we're growing. The Puget Sound Regional Council forecasts that by 2040, transit systems in this region need to grow by something like 90% to keep up with jobs and population growth.
Wow,
we're falling behind just now. So just trying to find stability and sustainability for King County Metro probably is not just maintaining the current service level, but it's finding a way to grow. Because if we're not growing, we're always just going to be shifting around the service hours, chasing the most effective way to use it, but at the same time leaving some people behind.
How has it hit your district?
I have a number of riders who are impacted by the service changes. They were on less productive routes that have had to shift over to other forms of transportation, certain times of the day, evening, weekends. We've also had people who've used to having a route and a walk to it. That walk is now extended, or they've had to find other means of getting to transit with our weather and weather patterns here simply than the 2 or 3 walk block. And that has impacted citizens in the way in which they contact us. I'm not alone. I have 8 colleagues who have the same experience across King County. But we had to do it in order to convince the public that we're more productive and more efficient, and the legislature that we needed that reprieve to keep our system rolling. One thing I will say is that if we don't have Metro Transit, it makes the rest of our transportation system much less efficient. 175,000 vehicle trips a day, if we had no Metro Transit at all, would be back on our streets and on our highways. That's a tremendous burden, tremendous element of congestion that I don't think our economy can deal with. So as a system for transportation, for cars and for folks using the bus, we need to have that balance, particularly since so many people are getting to our employment centers today using public transit.
17%, how did you reach that figure? Who came up with that as far as if that would have to be the cut?
That's our budget deficit, basically.
Okay.
So right now, in order to sustain the full system, we need about $75 million. $60 million of it is the annual operating cost of the service. Another $15 million is in order to buy the buses to keep those services on the road. We've already removed the capital dollars to purchase those replacement buses, and now our buses are beyond their useful life. We're running buses that are 14 plus years old now and waiting to see if we can get sustainable funding. So it's basically to close the gap. What we've done, Councilmember Phillips pointed out, our budget started to decline as the recession was coming forward in the second half of 2008. We're in the 5th year now of austere budgets at Metro. We had a gap between revenues and expenses starting in 2008, about $1.2 billion. We've found various different ways, working with the council and the executive, to close about $750 million of that. Ongoing savings plus revenue of about $143 million. So we've taken huge steps to close that gap without having to net cut service. But that residual gap, that structural gap, if you will, is about $60 million a year operating. And unless we can find a way to close that through a combination of new revenues and further expense cuts, we're going to have to start cutting service. And it translates into roughly 17% service.
Let's get back to how the whole thing about revenue. I mean, right now the legislature is dealing with a big issue regarding having to fund public education. Anything with any increased revenue is being scrutinized very closely. There is an effort in the legislature to try to get money for Metro here. How is that going right now? What's the potential for that happening?
Well, we have had a good reception in the House so far. Our bill is moving forward, giving us local options. Again, not something that would impact the state at a statewide level. That bill has moved through committee, through the Rules Committee, is out on the floor for a vote. If it passes and goes over to the Senate, we'll resume the fight there to see if we can move that bill forward. That would give us sustainable funding and revenue moving forward. The state still has to deal with its major fiscal crisis of its own, especially with regard to the Supreme Court decision in education. This gives us local options so that we can deal with it here and solve our own problems without getting in the way of that. I realize that's their number one issue, to deal with the educational crisis that they have there and funding issues. But simply put, if we don't have this solution, it hurts our economy here, that hurts the state coffers, and that hurts education. So giving us these local options helps the state as well.
What does local options mean?
What we're looking at is a motor vehicle excise tax, which would allow us to raise funds over time to close that gap. Currently, we need about 3.6 million service hours, and going forward, if we don't have new revenue, we'll only have about, if I'm correct on this, Kevin, about 3 million service hours, which means we're about 600,000 hours short. That's the 17% cut. So we're trying to fill that gap with funds like the motor vehicle excise tax.
What is the argument you make to lawmakers to try to convince them that this is important, that, among everything that they have to deal with, and particularly the other budget issues, about, the need for this and what it means to the region, to the state?
I think there's several things. First of all, we're not all the same in the state of Washington. There are many communities across the state who are not transit dependent nor need transit, particularly to get people to and from work. In the urban counties, particularly in King County with 40% of the jobs here, it's central to our local economy. Secondly, in making the arguments to the legislature, it's not just our riders, that they come out in droves to support the system. It's really the business folks in King County, the major business folks coming up and saying, we cannot operate in terms of a regional economy and a state economy without this solution. And then lastly, the final decision we made here. It's not a decision in terms of a tax vote or in terms of revenues at the state level. That'll be made here locally for our needs. So it's not in a situation where we're impinging upon your decision making for state needs.
Kevin, what does this mean long term for Metro in dealing with, kind of constantly trying to figure out how to make ends meet? And a system that serves so many people depend on it. We have crowded roadways as it is, as I mentioned, tolls. The traffic isn't lessening at all.
Well, there's two ways I'll answer that question. One is really down to the the human level. I've responded to countless letters and emails over months since we've been having to move service around, and I generally end the email, because people writing me lamenting that their service has gone away or they have to walk further or whatever. And I end it saying, dear Mr. Jones, Mrs. Jones, I wish we weren't talking about this. I wish we were talking about how and where we could be adding service to meet the growing needs. Every single city I go to in King County is looking for more transit service. The second way to answer the question, we've been out over the last 6 months or so looking at, as we're considering updating the strategic plan, talking to the various different cities and stakeholders. And one thing that we've heard fairly consistently is, how come you're not doing long-range planning? How come we can't work with you to envision how our community is going to grow and develop in the future? And we know that transit has to be part of that. And if we don't know where you're going to be at Metro and how you can help support our growth plans going forward, how can we make those plans? So there's a huge desire to do long-range planning that looks forward, that looks towards the impacts of growth and how to make growth and economic development work for the citizens of King County. We've been really prevented from doing that well because we've really been focused on survival for these last 5 years. And for the next year or more, we're going to continue to be focused on survival. But the world's going on. Economic development, last numbers I saw, employment is up 2.5% in the most recent figures here in King County. It's going to continue to grow.
Which is what we want. Which is obviously.
Yeah.
And with more things going on in this region, it's only going to mean more need for transit, which I think we've probably been short-sighted on already. So with that in mind, how do you then plan for the future at all? Because it seems like all you're doing is you're sort of like putting your finger in the dam and just for now.
That's certainly been the situation for the last 3 or 4 years as we've dealt with the national economic crisis and as it's played out here locally and regionally. And we really have sort of had to rush around and sort of keep the dike from collapsing. I think we've accomplished that, even with all the changes and our service being different for so many riders. We've gotten the message out, I think, that transit's important. Our riders let us know that. Our numbers actually have gone up. It's still very popular. And it will continue to be as the region's economy grows again. It's the best way, as I said, to get people to and from work. But the challenge now, I think as Kevin has alluded to, is a little bit of a reprieve. And we're stable today. We're asking the legislature to make us stable for the future. But how can we build a system that meets the needs he talks about, which is robust service, meeting growth in the future, and doing it in a planned way that isn't crisis-driven. And that's the next step for us, but we've got this one hurdle to get through.
Crisis-driven, has that just been the existence here for Metro in the last couple of years?
Yes.
That has not been much fun for you, I take it.
That's a glib answer. Yes and no. I mean, we're very fortunate. We have great leadership from the County Council, from Executive Constantine, from our various different partners. We have tremendous support from the business community, and we get a lot of good feedback. Of course, we have to, feedback also means we give something back. So we understand how we can help each other, how we can help the business community with their employee transportation needs and so forth. So it's not so much crisis management, but it's this lingering crisis. It's weighing on you. It's day-to-day getting the buses out and providing a good product. When we've been we've cut over 100 staff that don't drive buses and maintain buses. So a lot of the the behind-the-scenes infrastructure to make the quality product. You know, I kind of preach a total transit product. There's more than just the bus. There's the customer information. There's the bus stops, so on and so forth. Those things are a little bit creaky because we've not had the ability to keep up with the demands. So it's not so much crisis management as it is, as I think you said, it's kind of keeping your finger in the dike, knowing that the crisis is looming, and counting on our elected officials and the business community to help push the message forward so that we can figure out with our citizens then how to solve the problem.
What does this do for the morale of your folks?
Well, that's a good question. We have a great group of folks. We have about 4,500 employees at Metro, and the culture there is very service-driven. We have a phrase, safety service schedule. That's what's important. So they know that my job and some of my staff is working with our elected leadership is dealing with these political problems, the sort of macro problems. Day to day, we still get a real charge out of serving our public. So the morale hasn't been hurt in that sense. Everyone's working harder, as resources have been, the classic phrase, doing more with less. So people get tired. But at the end of the day, when we get a nice letter from a customer, or when we get a nice story about a bus operator doing some heroic thing in the field, it makes our day, frankly, to know that we helped serve somebody today.
From a long-term perspective, as far as the quality of the buses, the service, and all of this, if you don't get some relief here soon, what are you looking at?
Well, you get into a place of disinvestment. And you get into places, I point out, we've got buses now that are 14 years old. So sooner or later, the things that you need to be investing in to keep them in good shape, you've got to repair your roof every so often at home. You've got to clean the gutters at home. And so we have to fill the potholes. We haven't talked about the county's roads problem, which Councilmember Phillips, I'm sure, can talk about. Underinvesting in your infrastructure, whether it's the human infrastructure, your rolling stock, or your physical infrastructure, long term, you get into this cycle of disrepair. And that cycle of disrepair means that, in our case, in transit, fewer people are going to choose transit at the end of the day. The vast majority of people who use our transit system are what we call choice riders. They don't need to. They have a car. They have another way to get around. So it's our job to give them a quality product where they'll choose transit because it's convenient, and it's comfortable. And if we can't provide that convenience, reliability, and comfort, they won't choose transit.
And we have seen that disinvestment in the county's road system already. You can see the future if we don't get revenue to keep buses rolling on the streets in the roads of King County. But the roads themselves in the unincorporated area, 1,500 miles of county responsibility, are already in disrepair. And we now have an adopted policy because the revenue is so short to maintain our roads that many of them will simply turn to gravel. It's hard for me, living in this community and with a tremendous spirit of meeting the future and investment to do so, to actually have to take a vote to do that. But that's where we are in terms of our road situation. We do not have the revenues to maintain it, and some of them will simply turn to gravel. That's not a good thing for roads, and if our roads are in disrepair, that's not a good thing for transit. So taking this issue forward, not only to the legislature, but our public here, they need to see what the future is if we don't act now.
Last message here to lawmakers and trying to convince them that what's needed here. What do you say?
We have had really good conversations with the legislature over the last couple of years. Fortunately, measures, at least for King County, have moved forward. It's always challenging. We're in that challenge again with this session of the legislature. As I mentioned, we have a bill moving through the House of Representatives. Hopefully this week it will move to the Senate, and we will resume the conversation there with legislators, hopefully moving forward again. The one thing that's very helpful to us is speaking to the legislature with a single voice. So our riders, our suburban elected officials, King County council members, the county executive, the business community, labor, our workers, all saying the same thing about the need and what it means for the future. And so far, that's held.
One last thing that you'd want to say to them as far as the need for this and making your argument.
I think what I try to say to folks is value. We try to bring value back to the community, broadly writ. If I'm talking to an East Side legislator, I point out that the agricultural goods, the products that they need to bring to port have to come over state highways. They have to come over I-90. They have to come up and down I-5. And if those major highways, their capacity is constrained because there's not enough people choosing to take transit or carpool or a van pool in the HOV lane, then that freight's going to be slowed down. And if the freight's slowed down, it's going to undermine business statewide. We try to bring value back, quality of life, economic development in this region, and that's why King County Metro Transit service is so very important.
I'm struck by the kind of interconnection here as far as and a bit of a domino effect. The fact that it's not just people that ride buses, but it's the people that use the roads, the people that, you know, may be out in the outer areas of King County that are either farming or whatever they do, and you still have, there's a huge economic impact that can be felt here.
Absolutely.
So long term, so you're going to be feeling it as well. All right, gentlemen, well, we'll see what happens here in the future, and we'll keep our eyes to see what this means for ridership, what it means for the roads, what it means for the economy.
Absolutely.
And I appreciate it. King County Councilman Larry Phillips and also Kevin Desmond from Metro Transit. We appreciate you being here very much.
Our pleasure.
Right. Thanks for joining us for this edition of King County Connects. Please visit us online at kingcounty.gov, also at /KCTV. I'm Enrique Cerna, and we'll see you next time.